Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast, one of my favorite returning guests. He has been kind enough to have me on his show, The Putback, several times throughout the season. And I'm honored every time I get asked to come back. I don't know why they keep asking me to come back. You keep doing it. I always am happy to say yes. The man, the myth, the legend, the one and only SNY's Ian Begley. How you doing, my man?
Hey, John. First of all, you're a great guest. And so we are from you. We appreciate your time, man. And yeah, always happy to jump on here and talk Knicks with you on your fine show. Look, off-season, no coaching search, no team president, GM search, and no draft pick. So maybe a little bit of a quiet period for the Knicks, although you're always kind of waiting for something to happen here, but seems to be in a quiet period right now.
Quieter, that's for sure. Quieter, it seems right now. I'm just happy that for this interview, you got to stay inside and you didn't have to go out in your front yard to record this. Let's get right into it. I know you got a busy day. I'm going to actually start with the NBA news of the day, which is that something that I think a lot of people were expecting for a while. Bob Meyers, I guess, stepped down as head of basketball with Golden State. Just before we even talk about the Knicks and any of that, for folks who, because you talk to everybody in the league so much, for folks who may not know or understand how highly revered Bob Meyers is around basketball, can you just take a minute to let folks know how he's thought of around league circles?
I know Adrian Wojnarowski had a story. If he decides to come back, he'll be one of the most sought-after executives in North American pro sports. I don't think that's hyperbole at all. I don't think both were written it. If it's not hyperbole, and that just speaks to the level that he is respected around the league, and probably more importantly, within his own organization, because you saw it, win, lose, or draw, lowest moments, highest moments. Bob Meyers was in the middle of it all and had no problem being the face of the franchise for some tough moments. I'm thinking particularly about the Draymond Green, Jordan Poole incident. Credit the Warriors there. They come out the next day and they have Bob Meyers, Steve Kerr, Steph Curry come out and address it. And to me, it's Meyers' ability to lead, obviously ability to put a team together, but also ability to create relationships and foster those relationships with people from the top down in that organization, particularly the players. So it seems like if you're looking at Golden State and that dynasty, you're going to include obviously the players, but Bob Meyers played a huge role in where the Warriors have ended up. And I don't know what's next for him, whether it's TV or whether it's joining another team, or maybe ownership was mentioned in Adrian's story. But certainly teams with openings at the top are going to be coming hard after Bob Meyers, I would assume.
So the reason I start with Meyers is, even though the situation in New York right now, as you just kind of hinted at, there's no turmoil, everything. It was an unequivocally successful season by any standards I think anyone may have had. But at the same time, we're not that far removed from a period of time earlier this year where you reported that, had things, maybe that Cleveland game after the Dallas disaster at home, gone differently, or that week had gone differently. We don't know what would have happened. And I think, as you just said, it's not often that a front office executive free agent comes on the market of this caliber. I think we could sit here and both agree that Leon Rose isn't going anywhere this summer, but could you foresee a scenario where, you've covered the scene for a long time, where, the pressure to win off of a successful season stays at where it is or increases? And like you just said, Meyers, maybe he'll sit out and do a TV or something for a year. Could you see a scenario down the line where Meyers' name maybe gets mentioned in connection with the Knicks?
Look, things can change so quickly around here that I would never say never, right? But I think big picture here with the Knicks, John, you hit it. Leon Rose is here to stay for the moment because of where the franchise sits right here. And I think we don't talk about it a lot, but Scott Perry, I think, deserves credit for setting the table and leaving Leon Rose with the situation that he was left in with regards to picks and cap flexibility. But nonetheless, Leon Rose and his group, including Perry, have done the work to get you here. But they took a step back after their first playoff berth, took a step back that next season. You take a step back after this playoff berth, and it starts to become a bit of a pattern. I think that the expectations are going to be turned up regardless. And if you take a step back, things start to get painted in a different light. With that being said, can't foresee it anytime soon. But certainly, if things don't go the way Leon and everybody hopes they do, a couple of years down the line, the speculation is going to be there. Warranted or not, fair or not, speculation is going to be there because of the expectation to win and to improve year after year and to ultimately bring a star to New York and to compete for championships. Those expectations don't go away. So, there are scenarios where it's plausible, but not in the here and now.
You just kind of hit where I want to go with my next question, which is so I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth because James Dolan came out during his little mini media tour in the middle of the season and basically said what he expected. He wanted to go to the playoffs. And then he said, moving forward, he wants to see continued, steps forward, steps in that direction towards winning. He kind of alluded to the idea of getting a star, a big time star player for a team that really, I think outkicked their coverage this year in some ways, certainly blew away Vegas's expectations as far as over under and all that sort of stuff. I want to ask, do you think that there is, I don't want to say pressure on the front office to make something happen this summer, but maybe more pressure than you would normally see with a team that had the sort of season relative to expectations that the Knicks just had?
I don't think, just this is me kind of guessing, I don't think the internal pressure is turned up to a degree where we would be surprised that that's where it's at, because I think they've shown, Leon Rose, everybody on down has shown owner Jim Dolan, and they have gotten them again to a place here where you can build off of this foundation, whether you go via the trade route, whether you try to bet on internal development. You've built this foundation that you can, conceivably, you're a move or two, decision or two away from contending perennially. So I think that pressure being ratcheted up, I would be surprised if it was there based on the full picture from when Leon started to where he is now. But I do think, John, you hit it. Jim Dolan said it on the record. He wants year by year improvement. So whatever course you take, whether it's kind of keeping the same roster intact and running it back and betting on the internal improvement of some young guys, continued internal improvement, I should say, or cashing in your chips and trading for a top player, whatever it is, you're going to want to see a win increase and further advancement in the playoffs. If you're Jim Dolan, that's just the nature of pro sports. And I think for him, at least, I've heard from a few people who have spent time around him, he wants to know about the process and whether the decisions that are being made make sense, are logical, follow a plan. So I think that obviously you can make the case for that for New York now with Jalen Brunson, and we'll see what they do this summer. But I can't see pressure being ratcheted up right now on this group.
So I want to stick with that for a second, because you just said something really interesting to me about Dolan being interested in the process, because I think last summer they didn't trade for Donovan Mitchell, whether that was, they decided not to pull off the trade that Utah would have needed for them to pull the trigger. Whether they would have done something differently had they gotten another opportunity. I think you, among other people, reported that, there was no follow-up call. Once they decided to make the trade with Cleveland, that was it. That was the direction they were going to go. So the Knicks may not have ever had that chance to maybe up their offer one final time. If another scenario comes up this summer where, again, they have the opportunity to trade for a star player, not like a superstar player, because I think if they have that opportunity, I'd be pretty shocked if they bypassed it, almost regardless of the cost. But like, we don't have to name names, but like a star player, a guy who's been all-star, maybe a couple-time all-star. Do you think that they would have the same leeway to say, look, this is what we're willing to give up? You want to make the deal? Great. If not, we're comfortable going back again to the, with what we have already.
I would think in terms of just having autonomy to make the best decision that you see fit. I think Leon Rose has that. And everything we've seen right to date, John, you know this, you've seen it. We've all talked about it. It's been more of a conservative approach than an aggressive one, than a reckless one. And so I don't see any reason for the Knicks to change that approach at the moment. Other than this, talked to Bobby Marks about this the other day. The new CBA kicks in, not this season, but next season. And Bobby was talking about how, teams are going to be active in the trade market this offseason, whether they want to move off big salary or acquire big salary. And so, because it becomes more difficult to do that once this new CBA kicks in next offseason. So maybe because of that, Leon Rose, Scott Perry, William Wesley, Brock Aller, and the group say, hey, let's do this now, because to wait another summer, it's just going to get more complicated, more difficult. So let's be a little bit more aggressive now. But outside of that, I can't see Leon changing his approach in a major way, given what we've seen to date.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the new CBA. I was doing some math before for a newsletter I'm working on for probably next week. But like, you just look at the Knicks and their salaries and like what Immanuel Quickley is going to be projected to get and what Josh Hart's projected to get. And even, not that far away from Quentin Grimes' next contract, and then the extensions for Brunson, or next contracts for Brunson and potentially Randle, who we'll get to in a sec. But like all of a sudden their number will start to, push up against that second eight, what is it they call it, the lead apron, in a couple of years. But we're a ways away from that. But like, to your point, life happens fast. So I wouldn't surprise any of us if the Knicks were proactive. To that end, a person who has dominated a lot of conversation, especially with how his playoffs turned out, is Julius Randle. You've spoken about it a lot in, I feel like, multiple off seasons. The idea of trading Julius Randle is a tempting one for certain reasons, but the reality is that it may not be that easier to move off of this player who has meant so much to this organization, even if his playoff performances may not have been great. Would you be shocked or just surprised if they moved off of Randle in a trade this summer?
I would not be surprised if you're bringing back a player that is quote unquote at his level in terms of, production.
Okay.
And kind of a player who can fit into that pecking order that he's leaving. But to just get off of him, I would be surprised. I would be surprised based on conversations that people with the Knicks had in and around the deadline, leading up to the deadline. It was almost just not even a conversation, the idea of trading Randle. But I do think, John, and I'm curious to hear your opinion on this.
Yep.
We're talking about bringing in top player, not a superstar, but, a star level player. And I think if that player comes in, they're going to play with Jalen Brunson. But I don't think it can be both RJ Barrett and Julius Randle with that player. Depending on if it's a 3-and-D player, maybe it's a different story. But that's not like a star level player. If it's a player that needs shots, needs the ball in his hand, I don't see how it fits with RJ, Jalen, and Julius. So I think ultimately it's probably between RJ and Julius if you're talking about bringing in that big name player. How do you see it?
Someone's been reading my newsletters, Ian. No, look, it's obviously it's not just me. You've talked about this. We could talk about it 10 ways from Sunday. The numbers with these two players on the floor together, not just this year, not just last year. It's been 4 years. The numbers do not indicate that these are two players who amplify one another's games. And to the point that you just made, there's only one ball unless they've changed the CBA in that way as well. I completely agree with you And it sets up this kind of really interesting situation where, there's no question which of these two players had the better season. It was Julius Randle. I mean, he made the All-NBA team. RJ had a bit of an up and down year. And then you have the playoffs where RJ did some really nice things and is also quite a bit younger. And I think a lot of the fan base is very invested in. I guess maybe I'm kind of going to ask the Julius question in a different way with RJ. Like, do you think, because like it would have been easy if it's Donovan Mitchell coming in, because that's Donovan Mitchell, right? You're sending out a guy who kind of was the face of your franchise, sort of, kind of the way he ended the previous season. I'm talking about RJ, but you're bringing in Donovan Mitchell, so you could sell that. Do you think that there is a baseline for like the sort of player that they want to bring in if they have RJ going out in a deal this summer?
I mean, I would imagine that it probably is not at the Donovan Mitchell level, because it can't be. But I would imagine that it's around that same level, whether it's a player at Mitchell's level, a little bit below. We'll see what becomes available on the trade market, but I would imagine it's around there, because I don't know how they feel, but I think RJ up and down season for sure. But I thought he did pretty well in terms of not stepping on anyone's toes, not getting in the way when it became clear that the pecking order was Julius, Jalen, and then RJ, and there was a gap there. So I thought he did well in adjusting his own thought process on the court to letting those guys kind of go off and do their thing to the Knicks' betterment, right? Because the record was very good. But I do think there was a period of adjustment there. The only reason I bring that up is because if you're talking about RJ or Julius, and you're talking about bringing in another player who is going to need the ball, I think you have some evidence here that RJ Barrett can adapt his approach, his play to that kind of situation. Do you have the same evidence with Julius Randle? I don't think so. I haven't seen it. Maybe people feel differently, but I just wonder how that plays into whatever deal they end up making if they make one. But John, to answer your question, I would think it would have to be like if you're talking about Bradley Beal and you're dealing away RJ Barrett for Bradley Beal, the package of RJ Barrett and other things for Bradley Beal, and it doesn't, and the team kind of is at that same level, doesn't really propel itself to greater heights. I think you're going to look back and say that was not a good trade for this franchise. So I think your point is you have to be careful in who you're bringing back for an RJ Barrett package. I wholeheartedly agree with you.
So I guess on that note, it's like I completely agree with you. The concerns there about Randle, I think, look, I was dead wrong a year ago, and we talked about it last summer. I was completely wrong in saying just get Randle out of here. I think he's not what the organization needs right now. I don't care if you have to attach a pick to him. The time to move on is now. That was completely wrong. He rebounded his value this season. I'm very happy to admit that I was wrong because it was good for the organization. And the organization bet that bringing in Brunson would help Julius. I think now, if you're talking about bringing in another guy who needs the ball and potentially further knocking Julius down in the pecking order, that might be a different story. I'm wondering, and I don't know to the extent that you could answer this question, if you had to guess, do you think the decision makers in this organization maybe share that same fear if in dealing with what they're going to be dealing with this summer?
I can't give you much that's concrete other than I'll kind of refer to what I was talking about earlier. And things change, right? So this is not set in stone, but just like the conversations that some few people were having with the Knicks in and around the trade deadline, it was like, not that Julius was untouchable, but it was almost, again, a non-starter. Like, we're not trading him. And does it change between February and now based on everything that's happened, including the postseason? Sure, I think it would based on who is available. But I really don't know what their thinking is with regards to the question that you asked. I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence, right? Because these guys have been together for a while. You've seen Julius for a while.
Yeah.
We can surmise what the answer would be. But I don't have anything solid in terms of like what I've heard directly on that and kind of what I can report. But
sure.
I think we'd all surmise what the answer would be.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's move on here on a couple other players, and then we'll get you out of here. Emmanuel Quickley is extension eligible this summer. Another guy who you've been all over the reporting where he is concerned, and potentially were they open to moving on from him earlier in the year. Do you think he is on, I don't know, steady ground in terms of like, do if you had to assume, do you think the front office sees him as like is a core piece? We're the only way that we would trade him is if he was, similar to kind of how you talked about Julius, if it was a part of a package for a star trade, or do you think because of A, the money he's about to get, and B, the fact that it seems like they see him as, or he sees himself at the very least as more of a point guard. And he says, again, on the record, he has said that he wants to start someday. So how do you think that factors in terms of how they may approach this summer with Immanuel Quickley?
Well, the last thing that I had heard, and this was pre-postseason, was that everybody was happy, both sides meaning, and that I didn't hear anything about numbers, but it was just the idea that everybody was in a pretty good place regarding the comfort level now and into the future. So whether that means that they come to an agreement this summer on an extension, or Emmanuel and his group decide to bet on themselves, bet on Emmanuel having another big season, then go into restricted free agency, I'm not sure. I just know that the quality of the relationship from a 360-degree perspective between the Knicks and Quickley and vice versa was much better when I had checked in before the playoffs than it was at the start of the season. And it's amazing because, John, you mentioned earlier, 10-13 start, maybe a loss or two away from major changes. And that didn't happen with this Knicks team. And now we're having a completely different conversation.
Yeah.
Earlier in the year, start of the season, I mean, teams called the Knicks on Emmanuel Quickley. And I don't think the Knicks were hanging up the phone, depending on who you ask, whether he was available or just it was conversations. You get a wide range of answers on that, but they weren't shutting those talks down. And so if a trade had happened then you're missing out on this remarkable ascension that he had this year. And it's just amazing how many little things have to come together that end up looking like really big things when you look back on it and have to go right for you to win in this league. But yeah, I think just generally everybody is in a pretty good place with regards to the Knicks and Quickley. I would imagine that all options are open. With regards to a trade, I mean, teams calling, I'm sure he would be one of the first guys you're asking about. Yeah. And, if it's a player that moves the needle for the Knicks, I would assume that Quickley would be in those conversations for them and in those packages. If you're putting RJ Barrett out there like that for Donovan Mitchell, I would assume that you would do the same with Emmanuel Quickley for a player that, again, lets you continue to proceed here with your building yourself into a contender.
You mentioned Bradley Beal a moment ago. Obviously, the Wizards just made a hire, hiring away Michael Winger from the Clippers. He reportedly is going to have all sorts of leeway in terms of I don't want to say blowing up the roster, but building the thing as he sees fit. There's Beal there, and there's also a guy who used to play here, Kristaps Porzingis. Would it shock you if there were some KP rumors in connection with the Knicks this summer?
It wouldn't shock me. I mean, I think any kind of bad blood between organization and Porzingis is kind of not there anymore. Time heals those things, and it's also a different regime. I wouldn't be shocked, but I would think that there are probably other players that would be ahead on the Knicks list of priorities ahead of Porzingis. I mean, that's not saying much, but big picture in Washington, I mean, I think my read on it, at least going into their search, was that I didn't think there would be an appetite from ownership, from top decision makers for a full rebuild. Okay. And I thought that they would have to continue to, however you do it, continue to, climb the Eastern Conference because I don't think there was an appetite for a full tank job here. And maybe that's changed now through the interview process. But if that's the case, then if you're Michael Winger, are you choosing between Bradley Beal and Kuzma, Porzingis?
Cool.
I don't see a way how all three are there and you're turning yourself into a perennial winner. So I would imagine that's the choice you have to make. Kuzma, Porzingis, or just Kuzma, just Porzingis, or Beal. So that's just something that I find interesting going into this offseason with regards to Bradley Beal and his potential availability. Remember, he's got the no trade clause, so he holds all the cards there.
Yeah.
I would assume teams are going to be keeping an eye on that moving forward.
They're certainly a wild card team. Is there any? I'm just trying to think because there's teams that are clearly trying to win, and then there's teams that are clearly doing it the slow build, and there's very few of these teams in the middle. And people have written about it recently how even teams that may want to pivot don't have the most obvious avenues. Is there another team or teams out there that you think people around the league are keeping an eye on in terms of which way they'll go? I mean, Toronto gets mentioned sometimes, which way could they turn? But just maybe a team of interest from people you talk to around the NBA.
Yeah, certainly Portland, right? Because they have that number 3 pick, and they've got ammo to either go either direction, try to continue to build around Damian Lillard, or go young and try to build with new faces of the franchise. So that's obviously a team that I think people are keeping an eye on. Chicago, I haven't heard as much in terms of Zach LaVine lately. It's been kind of cool there just in terms of LaVine, but maybe, whether it's a DeRozan or Vucevic, maybe there's a move to be made there. I mean, we just talked about Washington. I think also Atlanta, based on some things that had happened prior to the trade deadline there, I do think that they're at least going to be involved in conversations with some of their big name players and bringing big name players in. The other team that I was thinking about is Golden State because, Bob Meyers leaving. But even that aside, the ownership would have to really, really make a huge financial commitment to keep Klay Thompson and keep Draymond Green on big time deals for their next contracts. And can they do that? Do they want to do that? I don't think they can enter a full-term rebuild at all with Stephen Curry as long as he is playing. But is there a way to kind of continue to compete while not bringing back both of those guys? Because that's a big bill to pay for ownership. So I would keep an eye on Golden State as well. I think other teams are certainly there. And then with Houston, if you're going to keep Gordon out, all those young guys are not going to be on this roster. So that's not a scenario where you're getting a ready-made player who's going to be able to, increase your win total by 5 wins off the bat. But some of those players, I would assume, become available, and those are intriguing prospects to take on for any team.
Last thing before I let you go, we've kind of, danced around that. I'll just come out and ask you, do you think this is going to wind up being I'll say busy summer for the Knicks, or maybe a busier summer than fans might anticipate sitting here right now?
I'm going to say yes for 2 reasons. One, the kind of chatter for a while now has been this is going to be an active summer for trades. There's going to be players who become either available or at least get talked about, big names across the board. And so that's one reason I would say yes. The other reason was what we talked about before with the CBA, and it just becoming a little bit more complicated to do these big deals once that new CBA kicks in, not this offseason, but next offseason. So this is kind of your 1-year grace period where you can get things done, where it can be a little bit more fluid. So that's why I would assume I would lean towards more yes than no because of those factors. But as we've seen, Leon Rose, he is going to be conservative and kind of set a line and not go beyond that in a lot of different ways. We've seen him do that off-season, trade deadlines, pre-draft. So I would assume he still holds to that theory and that approach while exploring what I think will be a lot of opportunities to bring in a bigger name.
Ian Begley, whenever I reference you in the newsletter, I always say the same thing. if Ian says it, you know it's true, because if there's one person that always, I hope you don't take offense to this. I mean this as a compliment, that I know he always knows more than he says. He never says less. You're always leaving something. I know you, and I know even tonight, I could tell it's the stuff you're keeping in your back pocket. If you say it this summer, anybody out there, take it to the bank. And I thank the good Lord that we have you reporting on this team, because it just gives me always a sense of security that if I get it from you, it's rock solid. And that is just such a luxury to have for a fan base that has dealt with enough stress over the years. So to have a reporter that, if it's coming from your mouth, okay, we're good here, or maybe we're not so good, but whatever. We know at least the info is good. So, thank you as always for the work that you do. It's appreciated by not only me, but everybody in the fan base.
I really appreciate that. I appreciate that moniker that I get in the newsletter shout outs. I really appreciate your words, man. That means a lot. I don't take it lightly at all. And really, really, it's a nice thing. Very nice thing to say about me. Again, I try to do my best and let the chips fall where they may, but I really appreciate that sentiment and that feedback.
You did the interview from inside, so you're already batting, above.
I'm holding my laptop though, like 2 inches from my face, just to get make sure the audio is okay. So.
Exactly, you did that for us. You inconvenienced yourself by holding the laptop. All right, everybody. If you're not following Ian Begley, what are you doing? He doesn't need my recommendation. But SNY. Anything else I'm forgetting, Ian, before I let you go?
I think we covered it, my friend.
All right, Ian, you're the best. Thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. Follow Ian, everybody.